The morning the story truly began arrived quietly, riding on a soft veil of pale gold that drifted across the prairie like an old blessing. Eliza walked the familiar path between her small cabin and the neighbor's ranch as though she were moving through a memory she had not yet lived, her basket cradled in the crook of her arm, her breath leaving fragile clouds in the cool air. She had always carried herself like a woman trying not to disturb the world around her, footsteps gentle, eyes steady, heart tucked deep where no careless hand could bruise it again. The wind pushed loose strands of hair across her cheek, and she tucked them away absently, unaware that a pair of watchful eyes, belonging to the cowboy who lived just beyond her eyes, lingered on her silhouette with a quiet longing he had never dared to name. Mac had been awake long before dawn, the way men become when solitude teaches them the habits of early light. He had fed the horses, checked the fences, and stood a moment by the porch rail watching the sky shift its color from iron to honey. He thought of Eliza more than he admitted, more than he understood, more than he believed he had any right to. She had lived beside him for years, but felt like a person he only recently began noticing, as though her presence had changed shape, gaining some new softness, new courage, new sadness, all wrapped together. He had dismissed his cook weeks earlier, not out of anger, but because he could no longer bear the emptiness that followed each meal made by someone who saw only the walls of his ranch and not the weight of his silence. Eliza, unknowingly, stepped into that empty space like a star wandering into a dark sky. The townsfolk often underestimated her, calling her kind-hearted as if it were a flaw, calling her soft as if gentleness were weakness. She had lost her long-held cooking job when the ranch owner's new bride decided she preferred a younger woman in the kitchen. Eliza accepted the dismissal without bitterness, though it left her drifting between small tasks and odd jobs, trying to rebuild a sense of place. Mrs. Hargreaves, the widow at the edge of town, adored her and often sent her home with herbs or biscuits. Tommy, the stable boy, grinned every time he saw her and joked that her smile could talk the sun into rising early. Eliza valued these small connections, though none of them reached the deeper ache inside her, the ache of wanting someone to see her not as convenient, not as temporary, but as worthy of staying. The day Mrs. Hargreaves fell ill changed everything. The old widow, trembling slightly, handed Eliza a pot of broth and whispered her request. "Take this to Mac. He hasn't been eating well." Eliza agreed, though she felt a flicker of uncertainty. Mac was a quiet man, nearly wordless at times, a figure carved from dust and discipline. She had spoken to him only briefly on rare occasions, and though he never seemed unkind, he carried an air of distance around him, like someone living behind a gate only he knew how to open. When she delivered the broth, he accepted it with a reserved nod. But when he tasted it later, alone in the echoing stillness of his home, something inside him loosened, a tightness he had grown too used to. The next day he appeared at her door and, in a tone awkward yet earnest, asked if she could cook for him just for the week. She hesitated, then agreed, unaware she had changed the course of both their lives. Their days found a rhythm neither planned. She cooked quietly in his kitchen, moving with a kind of humble grace that made the room feel warmer, fuller, almost lived in. Mac often repaired things around the house while she worked, tightening a hinge, oiling a door, fixing a stubborn floorboard, as if his hands needed purpose while his heart learned patience. She hummed sometimes, the melody light as drifting smoke, and he listened from across the room with an expression she never saw, one that held equal measures of fear and yearning. In stolen glances, in softened breathing, in shared silences, something tender began to take root between them. Tommy once teased that they looked like storm and sunshine learning to share the same sky. Eliza had blushed faintly, while Mac merely tipped his hat to hide the flicker of emotion that crossed his face. Gentle acts shaped their bond. She left warm cornbread on the counter before leaving. He rose before sunrise to brush snow from her porch so her morning walk would be easier. She noticed the small things he fixed around her cabin without announcing it. He noticed the way she clasped her hands when nervous, squeezing her fingers like she was holding herself together. There were no grand confessions, no sudden sparks, only the slow unfolding of trust. Some evenings they sat by the fire, not speaking, simply existing near each other as though sharing the same quiet breath. The growing closeness startled them both, yet neither stepped away. When winter broke harsher than expected, it did so suddenly, turning the sky to iron and the wind to knives. Eliza had just finished cooking a stew for Mac when she stepped outside, intending to return home before the storm worsened. But the moment she crossed the yard, the gusts became violent, snatching at her cloak, pushing her sideways. Mac saw the shadows gathering in the sky and went after her without thinking. His heart hammered faster than his footsteps as he followed the faint outline of her figure struggling against the frozen wind. When he reached her, she was hunched forward, trying to shield her face, her basket nearly torn from her grasp. Without a word, he lifted her into his arms, not with urgency alone, but with a tenderness that surprised even him. She let herself lean into him, her breath shaking with cold and something harder to name. Inside his ranch, the fire crackled fiercely, casting flickering gold across the room. He wrapped her in a thick blanket, his fingers trembling slightly as he tucked the edges around her. She sat near the fire, her cheeks pink from a storm, her eyes lifted to his with gratitude that struck deep. He knelt beside her for a moment, staring into the flames because he could not yet bring himself to meet her gaze. The storm outside roared like a wounded beast, but inside, something quieter, far more dangerous, stirred between them. Mac's heart beat with unsteady courage, a sound he had not felt in years. He moved to speak, then stopped, swallowing hard. Words came slowly to him, shaped with honesty rather than ease. "I kept people at a distance," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion, "because losing them hurt more than I ever let on." His gaze lifted, meeting hers at last, and the room seemed to still. "But losing you, before I ever had the chance to even try, that frightens me more than anything else has." She blinked, startled, breath catching softly. The firelight in his eyes made him look like a man standing at the edge of a truth he had run from too long. "I wait for your footsteps, Eliza," he continued, each word trembling but steady. "I wait for your voice in my kitchen, your humming in the hall, your presence in my days. And if it's not too much for a man like me to hope, will you be mine?" Her reaction broke him open in ways he never prepared for. Tears gathered in her eyes, not from fear, but from the immense relief of finally hearing what her heart had longed for yet never expected. She reached for his hand, her fingers trembling as they touched his. "You saw me," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. "When others looked past me, you saw me. That means more than you know." Her tears fell not heavily, but like rain on dry earth, awakening something lush and tender. Mac covered her hand with both of his thumb brushing softly over her skin. The storm outside calmed, the wind quieting as though honoring the moment between them. In the hush that followed, they sat close enough for their breaths to mingle, hearts aligned in a way neither had imagined possible. And to you who walk with their story tonight, may you hold on to the truth that love often blooms slow, like dawn pressing gently against the horizon. If their tale touched you, stay with us for more Wild West hearts and quiet miracles. Like, comment, subscribe, and tell us where in this wide world you're watching from.